now let's go ahead and let's talk about promoters in professional wrestling. There has been, I would say, 40, 50 promoters in professional wrestling throughout the years. I think one of the people that we need to talk about first, and we've talked about several times, probably one of the most controversy promoters of all time, and that would have to be Nick Doulas.
Yeah. Very successful.
Very successful promoter.
Very successful. Knew how to promote. He knew what he was doing. All the bad things you say about that we've heard from him, but he definitely knew what he was doing, and because he did it for years, absolutely did it for years. Now payoffs may not be so good, but you can't deny his success.
No, we always said he had he'd always walk around, and we call it the Nick Doulas wad.
Yeah,
have a wad of money. And this money would be $100 bill would be on the outside of this wad of money, but it would all be ones after that. But it would be huge.
That's right. That's right.
That was Nick Doulas. Nick Doulas was a character, but he was a very nice man. He was nice to us. And I know he kind of did some people wrong, but I don't think he did people like Jackie Fargo, Tojo Yamamoto. I think he knew better than to do them wrong. Don't you think so, Jack?
Yeah. I only had the opportunity to meet him one time, and he was just really, really super nice to me.
Yeah, they had a show for Nick Doulas. Georgia Championship Wrestling did. It was a Nick Doulas appreciation night. And I'll never forget that he almost cried that night. And you wouldn't think that he would have even cared, but he did. And he kept on saying, he'd always, every time we saw him, he would say the same thing. I started you, Ronnie. I started your daddy. He would tell us that every time we'd see him.
Sure would.
Nick was I have nothing but respect for him, and I don't see George Doulas as bad as many people look at him. I don't think the fans seen it that way. I think the wrestlers did, but I don't think the fans did. Let's talk about another great promoter. When we're talking about Nick Doulas, I won't even say great. Jack Pfeffer. Jack, have you heard any stories about poor old Jack Pfeffer?
He was just one of those notorious promoters that would use any means necessary, in order to keep promoting cards. He got blackballed out of the business, and he just didn't take no for an answer. So he came back with, instead of Buddy Rogers, it was Bubby Rogers, I believe, and all kinds of rip-off gimmick names. He get guys to come in and do those things, and he was fairly successful for a long time. So I never heard stories about the payoffs, so I can't testify to what those were. But he stayed in business for a long time.
Now let's remember the NWA World Heavyweight Champion there for several times was Jackie Fargo. So he wanted, and Jack Pfeffer wanted Nick Doulas to make sure that he called Jackie Fargo the NWA World Champion. And I remember Dad said he was sitting on there and he said, I can't do that. The NWA will throw me out of here if I say he's the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. But Jack Pfeffer was the original person. Eventually, Nick Doulas would do that as well. He had guys to do the same. He would say the same. Now, I don't know that he did that in his earlier years when Roy Welch was with him, but he did do that once he was away from.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he would announce Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2, and then when we went there, it was Mr. Wrestling 1 and 3.
Yeah, it was. Bad stuff. Ray Candy one time, it ended up being completely a different Ray Candy one time. So.
And see, Dad already told us before we went there that they were not going to be there. He said he can't because he's in Georgia.
This is true. Richard Hood asked this question, guys, who was the best payoff promoter? I'll start that. I think Paul Bosch might have been the best payoff promoter of all time. I think he paid his wrestlers really good. Jack, anyone else?
Yeah, I'd always heard that, and I always heard Crockett was very good.
Yeah, Jimmy Crockett.
Rodney?
Yeah, Jim Crockett Sr. And I, like I said, I've never heard anybody say anything bad about Jim Crockett Sr. ever.
Yeah.
Now, worst payoff might have been Nick Doulas. I don't know. Or Bob Geigel. The two of them people could have been. Stuart Kemp talked about Don Owens. Don Owens promoted wrestling in Portland, Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
A very nice man. That man was a tremendous man. I talked to him several times during the years that he was promoting wrestling. He was such a nice man. I remember one time he said, hey, he kind of had this talk about it. Hey, you think you could come to Portland? I'll never forget. And he kind of reminded me a little bit of a Stu Hart. And he said, you think you could come to Portland and help me book this thing? And I'm thinking, that's a long way from Tennessee. I don't think I'm going to Portland, Oregon, but he was a nice man, and I think he was a very fair promoter. I think he really was a fair payoff man. I don't think business was great there, but I think he really would pay his guys what they were supposed to get.
Well, Roddy Piper always had, he always, whenever he could do stuff for Don Owens, he would always go back and do it because he loved working for Don. Don gave him, I guess, some of his first opportunities, but he also treated him very well.
Yeah. Michael Barr asked, who was Bob Geigel? Rodney, I'll let you.
He was a wrestler that turned promoter, and then he was eventually the president of the National Wrestling House, but he promoted primarily in Kansas City and St. Louis area, Central States, yeah.
And Bob Geigel was the president of the National Wrestling Alliance for a while. And if you'll notice, almost every time somebody was the president, if Bob Geigel was the president of the National Wrestling Alliance, Harley Race was the world heavyweight champion.
Yeah.
It just ended up that way. Jim Crockett was the president. Ric Flair was the NWA world heavyweight champion. Yep. So it just so happened that's how it went. And another Sam Muchnick, another great promoter in professional wrestling, one of the best, Daniel, in pro wrestling. Let's talk about Cowboy Bill Watts. He was a no-nonsense promoter.
Exactly right.
He did not take anything from anybody, and maybe some people got away with some stuff. Even if he fined them, he might have gave them back the money on a bonus here and there. But he was a very hard promoter, wasn't he, Rodney?
Yes, he was. But he was just somebody that you didn't cross him. And he'll tell you, just like Ole said many times, I can lose money with or without you. And there was no doubt who the boss was. When Watts was there, he was the boss. And the buck stops with him. And, if he tells you he doesn't want you wearing a warm-up suit, that's exactly what it means. And he showed no favoritism when it comes to that. He would fine Buddy Landell. Landell was fined so much that he ended up paying Watts to work. So
I think he did. We'll talk about
what he was doing. He knew the psychology of the business, and he knew how to promote the big shows. I mean, we've said some things here, but does not just because we disagree on some certain things doesn't mean that he wasn't a great promoter, because he really was.
Yeah, he was very good. Someone that Jack watched several times, Fred Ward in Columbus, Georgia. Jack, what did you think about Fred Ward?
I love Fred Ward. He was a good man. He had told me, when I got out of the Army, to come back and see him, and actually I did. But by that time, he was right at the tail end of doing any promoting, and so I never did get a chance to actually work for him. But I used to go to the matches every Wednesday night there in Columbus, and man, just tremendous shows. Fred connected with his audience. As a promoter, he knew his audience. Smallest crowd I ever saw there was probably 2,500. And and it wasn't unusual to have 5,000, which I think is about building capacity there. So great cards, great memories of Fred.
Fred Ward, the only problem Dad would always have with Fred is if Fred didn't like to have any heat. And if he was up front around the fans and something happened in the ring that was bad, they would all get up there and he couldn't just say, well, I can't do nothing about it. I can't. No, he had to go in the ring and reverse the decision. He did that so many times in Columbus, Georgia. It made Ole Anderson so mad Ole would refuse to go back to Columbus, Georgia for a long period of time. You remember this, Rodney?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he taught. He had to teach Fred a lesson about that. He reversed the decision over an incident a week before, so they had another referee the match, and Dad stayed with Fred Ward, and this did the exact same thing, but this time it was the opposite way. And he said, "Did you not reverse the decision last week because of this?" He said, "I go up there and reverse this decision there." "Well, I'm not going to do that." "Yeah, you have to." He said, "If you don't, I will. And I'll tell him that you told me to do it. So you either go up there and you reverse the decision just like you did last week, or I'll do it for you, whichever you prefer." So he said, "I'll never do that again." I'll never. He said, "Just let me know when something's happening. I'll be hid."
Mickey Mayfield asked a question: did the promoter Paul Jones ever wrestle, or was he just a promoter? He did wrestle. Paul Jones did wrestle. And I mean, he was in wrestling for years. He might have been in wrestling 60 years.
Yeah.
As far as being a promoter and a wrestler. And, Paul Jones was more of a, by the time we were there, he was more of a figurehead than he was. He still owned part of Georgia Championship Wrestling. But he just show up at the shows, and he would come out and make matches at the Atlanta City Auditorium. And a very nice man, by the way. He was a great guy. Charlie Harbin was a promoter in professional wrestling. A lot of people wouldn't know who he is, but Charlie Harbin would take, let's say if he left Atlanta, I don't know, at 7 in the morning, he might arrive in Chattanooga by 5 that afternoon, and it's only a 2-hour trip. Charlie Harbin was the slowest man. He not only drove slow, but he also walked slow. They'd have a 15-minute match at the Memorial Auditorium in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it would take him the whole 15 minutes to walk from one side of that stage to the other side of the stage at the Memorial Auditorium. I've never seen such a slow man in my life.
They'd have him to come down to make matches, and it'd take him forever to get down the aisle to get to the ring.
He was something else. Let's see. Jack, what about Mickey Henry?
Me and Alan had a lot of experience there. Mickey was cut from that Nick Gomez cloth, and I'll just leave it at that.
You have to give Mickey Henry all the credit in the world. How long has he been promoting, Jack?
He is close to 40 years now.
Wow.
I mean, you have to give him the credit. No matter what people want to think about Mickey Henry, I have to give him. He's been promoting wrestling nonstop for 40 years. Richard Hood, Jim Barnett. Jack, how important was Jim Barnett to professional wrestling?
I think he was huge.
Rodney?
Yeah, no doubt. He was there in the beginning when wrestling first went up. When TV started, he was there in the beginning to put it on. Then he went on to Georgia Championship Wrestling, also had some interest in Florida and then Australia. Big business just about everywhere he went. Just huge business.
The original WCW in Australia.
Yeah.
And we did a post on that. Carl Cox was on that.
Yeah. Richard was mentioning Jarrett and Welch Promotions, and Lynn Gross had mentioned Jarrett as a smart promoter. He was. The key to Jarrett, I've always said, and I think, was the fact that Memphis never changed. He never lost his arena. He never lost his TV. It stayed steady throughout his entire time in being in business. That's the key. Lots of places did not have that. Atlanta, the big loss was the Atlanta City Auditorium. Once it was gone, things were never the same. Never the same.
Richard Hood also said Roy Schreier, and he was a very smart Los Angeles, California promoter. He knew don't give him a lot. He got mad at Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens for giving them too much in one night. And he said, I'm going to be here when you're gone. So don't do that ever again. Don't have good matches. I don't need no good matches. I just need that.
Just give me a middle of the road, Great.
Yeah.
Well, he understood his crowd.
Herb Abrams.
Herb Abrams. I ain't got no money to pay you, boys, but I got cocaine back at the hotel.
Leonard did say Jarrett was a smart promoter, so much that Vince liked him and worked with him that it in itself speaks volumes.
Well, obviously, Vince watched that show because it actually WWF was almost Jarrett Promotions, just in a bigger scale. I mean, with all the gimmicks and everything. I mean, it was
well when Vince was looking at possibly going to prison, when the government was, had the whole steroid thing trials going on with him, he'd brought Jerry Jarrett in to take over in case he did go to prison. So, Vince had a lot of respect for what Jerry did.
It's amazing if you watch or listen to Something to Wrestle With. Now, Bruce Pritchard says that never happened, that he wasn't there to do that. You talk to James J. Dillon, he said, yes, it did. So I don't know who to actually believe is telling the truth. I don't know. Was he there to do that? Jarrett said he was there to do that.
Yep.
So I don't know. I guess you just have to.
Well, if we want to get down to the bottom of it, let's ask Cornette. He knows everything.
All right. Well, there's no doubt. There's so many more promoters. We need to do a whole. We need to talk about Jim
Mayfield once again agrees with me, and when he agrees with me, it's only right that we should acknowledge his agreement with me. Right there, Mickey Mayfield. I agree with Rodney that Atlanta Municipal Auditorium was a great place to experience wrestling. When it closed, the industry totally changed.
Yes.
Yep. That is my favorite place to ever go to. I loved it there.
Richard was talking about the giant Baba. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, we definitely need to do a series on all the promoters.
Yes.
Slim Length, Jim Barnett, Nick Goulas, Roy Welch, the whole promoters and the territories of professional. And talk about the territories and how many territories there were. At one time, there were over 32. And I think Rodney's got a book for the National Wrestling Alliance. And we'll look through that. We'll go through that one episode. And we'll go through it was the official list. You would get one every year, and it would tell you the main people and whose company was who and who was the booker, who was the assistant booker, and it was all in the National Wrestling Alliance book. And we'll look at that on one of the programs, and we'll talk more about the territories and the promoters of professional wrestling. If you're watching this, give us that big thumbs up, the big ho, big thumbs up. And subscribe to the page, and we certainly appreciate it because every time you like it, it lets us know that you care what we're doing. All right, guys, you ready to finish it up with the insiders and see what everybody has got to say? Let me see where I was. Well, I don't know where I was when
we're talking about Herb Simmons. From St. Louis, ran for 45 years. Richard talked about Antonio Inoki. Daniel Lane said that Vince McMahon Sr. asked Jarrett to look out for his son because he knew how many enemies he would make. Mike Barr, are you catching up now? Michael Barr, so much can be said about territories, about wrestling and promoters, especially Atlanta. Glenn Allen Shelton used the numbers 108. Apparently, that might be his lottery numbers for tonight. Richard Hood, Carlos Colon.
Yes.
Puerto Rico, huge. And then, of course, the Funks, Dory Funk Sr., promoted out of the Amarillo. Just awesome.
Victor